Welcome to the Igniting Imagination podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood. This is the third and final conversation in our series, Light on the Hill, Faith and Leadership in the Midst of Disaster. In the first two episodes, we heard from church leaders and community organizers in Kerr County, Texas, as they shared what it looks like to lead and to neighbor in the wake of historic flooding. Today, we're joined by Greg Richards, a longtime Kerrville attorney whose 30 years of relationships in the Hill Country uniquely positioned him to step into the recovery effort. When the floods hit, Greg called the Community Foundation of the Texas Hill Country and asked how he could help. What followed was a new role in strategizing how recovery funds are distributed and how case management can ensure that resources reach those who need them most. Greg's story is one of gifts and calling, aligned in surprising ways. In this conversation, we'll hear how faith, vocation, and disaster recovery intersect, and what lessons the church can learn about long-term equitable response in times of crisis. A final note before we share my conversation with Greg. As we've listened across these three episodes, one theme is clear, and it is perhaps a bit obvious, but important to say aloud. Disaster recovery is not a short-term project. It requires neighbors, congregations, and whole communities working together for the long haul. At Texas Methodist Foundation and Wesleyan Impact Partners, we are committed to walking alongside leaders and communities through both the immediate aftermath and the years of rebuilding that follow. Our role is to listen, to learn, and to respond with compassion, care, and resources that make recovery possible. If you feel called to be part of this ongoing work of restoration and hope, email me personally at lgreenwood@wesleyanimpactpartners.org, and I'll connect you with our philanthropy team. Now here's my conversation with Greg. Hi, Greg. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to take a few minutes and introduce yourself to our listeners. And you might say a little bit about your relationship to Kerrville and maybe your work as an attorney and even how your faith has shaped your life and vocation to this moment. I know that's a lot. So you might just hit on some key moments. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm Greg Richards. I have practiced law in Kerrville for 30 years, and how I got here was a God story.
Hmm.
I got out of law school thinking I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I watched, LA Law and all the shows, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to stand up in front of people and argue. And I got out of law school and found that I just did not have the temperament or the skill set or the passion to do it in the real world. I could probably do it on TV. That looks like a lot of fun, one case at a time, nicely buttoned up at the end of the day. And I picked Kerrville off of a map. I had never been here.
Oh, you're kidding.
I knew I wanted to live in a small town. Wanted to raise my family in a small town. I grew up in a small town, but I wanted to be part of a community that had some culture and was close enough to a metropolitan area that I could go avail myself of those resources without having to fight traffic every day. And I picked Kerrville, and I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. And I literally showed up here on Friday, August the 4th, 1995. And Monday morning went and rented an office and hung out a shingle. And the rest is just a testimony to God's providential hand and saying, here's a matter, here's something, here, go work on this, do this. And it's been all over the board, or was all over the board for years. But my practice is really centered around all things transactional. And right now, I really exclusively only work in two lanes. I do kind of all things small business and nonprofit. And then I also do all things real estate. I'm board certified in two different areas of real estate, residential and commercial real estate law. And for the most part, especially in a small town, if it involves dirt, I've done it and enjoy doing it. So that's at least a brief description of who I am, at least what I do. for the day job.
Right, right. And so tell us a little bit about how your faith has shaped. I mean, you already said being in Kerrville is a God thing. So somewhere in there, you've got this deep faith that has shaped you and leads you. I know that about you, even to this day. And so talk a little bit about that.
So I would say that um, my life has been, at least since, probably law school, my life has really been about trying to unlock and release what I feel like God has put in me.
Mm,
And um, that has taken me down so many paths from, uh, deep involvement in churches to starting churches to um, leading Bible studies to, I mean, it just all the things that God has used to kind of shape me into who I am has really been a product of me just being curious about
mm,
who is this person that you've created and what is he supposed to do, and how should he go deploy his talents, and so that shaped everything. Uh, how I approach the projects that I work on day to day, the things I get involved in, don't get involved in, the relationships I've built. They've all kind of been around this curiosity to just understand, what was Greg put here to do?
mm. We often talk at Texas Methodist Foundation and Wesleyan Impact Partners about how central identity and purpose are, and that our whole lives are really about discernment. The discernment's not something you do once and then you live your life. That really we're called to live in a posture of discernment. And I have just heard you articulate perhaps the most completely a vision of what that looks like. It's that curiosity about what God has put in you and formed you for. And so that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And I think it really grounds our whole conversation, because where I want to take us now is to the floods that happened in Kerr County and really throughout the Hill Country and um, and I would love for you to take us back to those early moments and how you experienced that, and then how you began to find your place in the recovery efforts.
Well, it starts with a semi-petulant, funny story. My wife and I had taken off to San Antonio on Thursday, July the 3rd, just for a date night. And
Mm,
we had gotten a hotel room at our favorite place and gone out to dinner. And I was really looking forward to all the family coming in and the Robert Earl Keen concert on July 4th and the fireworks, which are literally my favorite day of the entire year.
mm,
And one of my new favorite musicians, a guy named William Beckman, was supposed to headline the thing. So I get up at 7 in the morning on Friday, July 4th, and I open the curtains at the hotel and it's raining outside. And I'm like, dadgummit, this better not ruin my concert. Of course,
mm,
absolutely unaware of what's going on. And I pick up my phone and, immediately have just, I don't know, tens, hundreds text messages and, very quickly turn on the news, kind of see what's going on and throw everything in the car and dart back to Kerrville on the phone the whole way.
mm,
And where it originally, my concern is I didn't really have any idea about the impact that the flood had had. We've had lots of floods. My office, literally out my right window here, I can see the river, and
mhm,
it's flooded many times. It's never come up to my office. It's gotten close, but it's kind of done its normal thing. And so I didn't think about floods in Kerrville in terms of the catastrophic flood that it turned out to be. I just was thinking of rising water and I hope my office is okay. And so I got to the office and my office was fine. We had water within like 3 inches of coming in our door, but wasn't affected. Well, then the story started to unfold, and then you start seeing the helicopters, and absolutely caught me flat-footed. Had no idea what to do. Kind of spent that first day just really glued to my phone and news and Facebook and just really trying to capture the enormity of what was really happening. And within uh, within that day, or maybe it was the next day, I was like, all right, I got to do something. And I didn't really pause to think about what to do. I just started, loading my truck up with chainsaws and, you know, I don't know what I was expecting to do, but I thought, well, I'll just go be helpful somewhere. And so I took off and made my way to West Kerr County, where I have lots of friends and clients, and thought, well, okay, I can be helpful to somebody. And literally could not find purchase at any location. They were just, we don't need you, go away. And where I landed was at the house of one of my really close friends' mother. And her story was an incredible one. She's 82 years old, I believe. She had 8 other family members there, including uh, kids and their spouses, grandkids and their spouses, and 2 babies and 2 dogs. And they woke up to water up to their knees in the house and ultimately made their way into a second-story loft. The water had risen to and had clawed their way out through the side of the house, punching a hole in it, tossing babies up onto the roof and pets, where they sat for 2 hours until a neighbor came and rescued them with a boat and got them out safely. And so they were one of the beautiful stories of survival and all this. But I just went out to the house and I was like, can I help? And, I dug around in the mud for a second, helping trying to find stuff, but just showing up
Yeah.
and saying, I care.
Yeah.
I didn't see it at the moment, but in hindsight, that was the most powerful thing I could have done, is just shown up and say, I'm here. I'm with you in this. And I'm sorry.
Wow. Wow. These moments of talking about the flood in those first hours and days are overwhelming. So thank you for going there with us. And you moved from that moment to having greater clarity about what was yours to do.
Yeah. It was really, that night, I think it was Sunday night, I came back to the house, talked to my wife, and I was like, I just couldn't figure out how to be helpful. And she kind of looked at me and she said, Greg, does anybody really want your soft hands on a chainsaw out in the middle of a debris field? And I'm like, fair point, but hey.
Wow.
She said, you've got other talents that nobody else possesses.
Mm.
You figure out how to use those talents. So Monday morning, gathered up my entire team at the office and just said, hey guys, help me brainstorm. How can we use our unique skills to do something in response to this?
Mm-hmm.
And I got a list of, hey, you need to call these 4 or 5 clients and see if you can help them. And so one of those calls was to Austin at the Community Foundation.
Okay.
We'd been the general counsel for the Community Foundation for, I don't know, last 5 or 6 years, maybe have 4 or 5 touches a year working on projects. And I called Austin and said, hey, do you need any help doing anything? And before the words, finally left my lips, he was like, yes, now, please. And so I can go into it and I can tell you kind of what those first steps look like. But that's where clarity came, was asking my staff, hey, who can we help? What can we bring to the table? And they kind of quickly sent it in and said, call these 4 or 5 people. And one of them said yes. And that has started what has been my last 55 days of, or however many it is, of work that has just been all day, every day.
Yeah. That's significant what you just said. That is 55 days of work that has been your work all day, every day. And you were not elected to an office. You were not hired to a position. You are what we've called a community quarterback in a way that is purely built off that phone call the instinct to gather your team and to brainstorm, and the sense of your own gifts that you bring to this.
Yeah, but I think it's really important and fair to point out that this was not some well thought out linear,
Okay.
content, process. It's literally just sort of kind of leaning into something. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to be doing with the community foundation. Certainly had no perspective, but I followed the breadcrumbs,
Mm,
and that has been thematically how I have approached every day. It's like, God lays a stone out on this stormy sea and says, put a foot there.
mhm,
Step on that stone. Okay, now I've laid out another stone. Step on that stone. And the one stone was, hey, wait a minute. My wife comes in and offers kind of this global perspective. Okay, you're right. Lean into that. Come in the next day. Hey, you got a team. They're not in the same emotional state you are. Engage with them. Okay, they have an idea. Move on the idea. Another stone. And then make the call to Austin. Yeah, need your help. Great. Don't know what I'm going to do, but we literally turned our entire team over to him, laid a stone. And that has been the rhythm that God and I have been on every day, all day, is lay a stone, step on it. Some days the stones are 2 or 3 ahead. Some days the stones don't appear until my weight has shifted and I'm past the point of
mm.
turn. And then all of a sudden it appears.
Yeah.
The big takeaway is this was not Greg, sitting back going, oh, I see a path here. It was literally one step at a time. And a step usually taken with some level of trepidation. What is this going to mean? What's going to happen? What am I going to do? I just walked in.
And grounded in what you described at the beginning when you talked about your faith, it's grounded in a posture of curiosity and listening to what God is doing, paying attention to what God is doing, and um, that sort of posture of discernment that you live in all the time. You call it curiosity. Okay, God, what next? Where's that stone? I'm leaning. Yeah, yeah. But that's and it existed long before July 4th. But oh my gosh, what you and God and the people of Kerr County, Austin, and others are doing because of that, because of your curiosity and listening posture. It's really amazing. I'd love for you to talk about. I know that you've been very much a part of the conversations around the strategy for distributing the remarkably generous funds that are now housed at the Community Foundation, and I would love for you to talk about that a little bit from your perspective. What makes that both a hopeful and very complex task for this moment?
Yeah. So the community foundation stood up this flood relief fund. I think it was 9:48 on the morning of July 4th,
Mm,
and really because of the foundation's 40+ year existence and solid reputation in the community, and just really really smart people that run it. Um, they were able to kind of get out and be the lead fundraising entity, and because of their reputation, I think, as I've both heard and taken calls from people that want to contribute, they're like, who do I give it to? And thankfully, the community foundation had the reputation to serve as a basis for lots of folks to say, this is where it needs to go.
mm,
So they've raised over $100 million. And what's really unique about it is that I've had conversations with other community foundation leaders in different parts of the country that have responded after a disaster, and several of them have raised similar amounts of funds. But those funds are, just to give you for example, in parts of California that have been through the wildfires, their communities have raised $100 million, but they've lost 7,500 homes. Well, that's, it's a big pot of money, but when you start dividing, 100 million by 7,500 homes, it's not very much.
Right.
And in our community, we've got 100 million plus and don't really have an accurate count on exactly how many homes, but it's absolutely below 1,000, probably below 700. So that really presents a unique opportunity. But, with big dollars comes big responsibility. And, the thing I said day one to Austin, and it was one of those, I've had these moments in my life where I feel like, I just open my mouth and God's wisdom pours forth and I'm like, oh, that was cool. But it didn't necessarily, wasn't anything I strategized or thought about beforehand. And the thing I said to Austin in day one, when we first met, and I've continued to say it over and over again, is that we have to treat this process with the utmost of integrity and the utmost transparency. Well, integrity dictates that you do it well. And transparency dictates that you're communicating your sequencing of how to approach this.
Yeah.
And the big challenge in all of it, really, you could boil it down to speed versus elegance. There's no shortage of people that have showed up and said, "Give me money, I will go solve a problem." Are they the best person to do it? Don't know. But the other end of the coin, or the other end of the spectrum, is you don't want to sit on this $100+ million for 6 months or a year while you build this elegant strategy. And all the while people are just suffering deeply and you're not meeting any of the needs. And Austin has really led the charge for what I feel like is a very speedy response that still has a measure of elegance and absolutely is done with integrity. And really, he's been able to do that because he's been working with local nonprofits that are known to him.
Yeah.
He knows the board of directors, he knows the past chairman, he knows the ED, he knows the staff. And so there's a high level of trust that when you just go stroke somebody a check for 6 figures and say, get this to people that need it, because that's the flow. The foundation doesn't give money to individuals. It gives money to other nonprofits who then deploy those funds within whatever realm that they are equipped to do so.
Right.
But working with those trusted partners, he's been able to get it out quickly. But the challenge in all this is that, $100 million sounds like, just a ton of money. But when you start thinking about the depth of destruction and in both the physical sense, but also the mental health and well-being sense, and our river, which provides water to our community and is our playground. These are complex, expensive problems to solve. And so trying to think of them in the right sequence and how to prioritize them, that's been our biggest challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. So complex. And, you named something that continues to be a theme and in our conversations in the recovery effort is those relationships that have been built in the community over years. Those are critical. They don't just happen in times of crisis. They happen day in and day out. And so when the crisis hits, there are these relationships already built and the trust is there. And Austin is so well respected. You are so well respected. These connections, these networks are making it possible to move that money in ways that make a difference. One of the things that you have named, when we sat in your office a couple weeks ago, you talked about the importance of caseworkers in the long-term recovery. Can you talk about what you mean by that and why sort of case management, if you will, is critical in this long-term effort?
Gosh, it's critical in so many ways, but I could really boil it down to one word, and that is agency. I think it's imperative to give the folks that have been affected by this flood agency in figuring out what does recovery look like for them. And so case manager becomes integral to that, because ideally the case managers are aware of every resource that's out there. They're equipped, they're trauma informed. They understand the limitations that people who've been through a traumatic event. I've heard the term trauma brain. And I've had some real life experience with a family member that kind of went through that and kind of understand just the limitations that are at play. But having a case manager, having a single point of contact that folks can reach out to say, they already know your story. Tell them what you need and equip them to be able to resource that need. I just think that's very critical so that folks are not having to figure out, well, where do I go for this? Where do I go for that? Who do I need to call? And so that's one of the first priorities that the foundation has tackled. And case management is already underway. And we kind of formalized it and put some money towards creating a little bit more of a structure to it and getting more bodies on board and committed long term so that we don't have case manager turnover, because it's been an all volunteer army up to this point.
Yeah.
And so we just see that as really, really important to effectively meeting the needs and identifying the needs of what's out there in the community.
I so appreciate your coming from that perspective. We all know that disasters often surface, peel back the layers on the vulnerabilities that already existed. And I know that's true in Kerr County. And so I so appreciate your coming at this from the perspective of agency. Other words we might use are dignity, equity, fairness. How do we be sure that the folks on the ground, the folks most affected, don't just get back to where they were, but get to a better place, and that there's a sense that their voice is heard and their needs are valued and heard, and who they are and their decision making is part of the mix.
Well, and I've seen that, very early on as I kind of moved into strategy and program design, working with Austin and Elena White, who I'll tell you about later, and other members of the team, we kept searching for, okay, hey, North Carolina, California, can you just share your playbook with us so we can just, find and replace and just plug in and go? And that's not a thing. You can certainly take what others have done and extrapolate data and learning and processes that are workable, but it just really reveals that, just like the federal government can't come in and say, here's exactly how you do disaster recovery in your community. They can bring resources. You can't just plug somebody else's approach to resolution into this community. You have to look at it through the lens of this community, and you got to have community members involved in that discussion. Well, you take that one more layer down. You can't dictate to somebody who's been through the flood, this is what your recovery looks like. You have to ask them, what does your recovery look like? And then you build the system around what you hear people say they need.
Yeah, that feels really critical. It makes me think about, so most of our listeners are leaders in churches, some clergy, some lay leaders, and in nonprofits and things. And where have you seen like gaps or risks in the sort of disaster response systems or lack of systems, if you will, that churches and community leaders might need to be aware of?
I think I labored on this question, just really trying to understand how I could answer it effectively. And this is the best I've come up with, is that the church community's response has been amazing. They've stepped in and tackled things that they had never done before. They equipped themselves. They pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and they made a difference. From my perspective now, and again, this is kind of thematic of how Greg got into the slot that he's in now. It's listening and being curious about, what do you have the capacity to do, Greg? What do you have where can you draw from your history to bring something meaningful to the table? That's the gap. Is we've had a lot of churches and organizations just show up, and it's whatever happens to be on the needs list. Like, we can fix that. We can do 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 that. And so they try to come at it. We can solve all the problems. What I would love to see churches do is catalog, get curious about what is it about your group that is unique. And most organizations, the leaders know the people in that organization, but maybe even get as granular in, I have retired people come through my door on a daily basis, working with them on a project. And I always ask, because I'm curious, a lot of them are retired. Hey, what'd you do? You would not believe the talent that is in this town. I've had retired physicists that worked on these amazing, global projects, and, authors, and I mean, you name it. And you just don't know until you ask. And so it's kind of like, what is it that your church, your organization, your Sunday school class, what is the skill set? What's unique? And go do one thing right, and go do one thing better than everybody else. Don't try to do all things. I think that's because it takes a while to figure that out. And if you're doing it in crisis response mode, it's much more challenging, because speed is everything, and everybody is motivated by this same sense of wanting to help.
Sure.
That they go grab Greg's chainsaw and shovel and rubber boots, and they put them in the truck, and like, we're going to help. And that's really worked in a lot of ways. But what if churches and organizations could say, a disaster is coming. Don't know when, but it's coming. What's the unique role that we can play in this, and develop that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's that same kind of discernment that you talked about for yourself, and just referred to. Your soft hands on the chainsaw might not be the best use, but how do churches do the equivalent of that, right? That their discernment and understanding their unique gifts and charisms, and their membership even, and,
Right.
and what gifts and assets they have to offer. That makes a lot of sense. I know partnerships have been critical in this. You've talked about that, and the different relationships and the networks in this recovery effort, the community foundation, core, the churches. Like, how have those partnerships been essential? What has been most essential? What have you learned from it? And what can churches learn about building these kinds of relationships before the crisis hits?
The network. Tapping into the network of your people. And so I can think, without exception, every single consultant, expert, lawyer, CPA, tax lawyer, communications expert, they've all come through relationship referrals. And every one of them has been stellar.
Yeah.
And we've had a fair amount of solicitations. Hey, we'd like to show up and we'd like to help, but it's when you're again thinking about doing something with deep integrity, and you want to make sure it gets deployed right, and every dollar gets spent on something valuable, and you're dealing with somebody you don't know. To me, prudence dictates that you take it slow, that you investigate, you really understand, can they do what they say they can do, or are they just trying to, sell me their product or service? But having a network that you can tap into, and it's literally been, I trust Elena, she's the CEO of Connective, who has been a extremely robust and invaluable partner in helping us navigate this. They're disaster recovery experts. And when she says, hey, call this guy, call this lady, call this company, I've had experience with them, I know this guy. Well, then I call those people. And then they say, oh, you need tax assistance, call this person because they're really good at this and I've worked with them before. And then they say, oh, you need a tax lawyer. And so I'm just kind of working this chain that started with one person, and I'm working my way out that chain, and I'm continuing to deal with people who somebody else trusts that I feel like I can trust.
Mhm. Yeah. You've given some really, I think, important, valuable, um, might call it advice, but wisdom for congregational leaders, even community leaders. And one, it's about kind of know yourself as an organization, but also individuals. But be curious, know what your assets are, what your giftedness is, and then you've talked about relationships and networking, and which is actually connected to that, right? If you know your people, then you can say, hey, you ought to call so and so who is just retired from or is doing this. And so it's knowing your people, but it's also those relationships and the network that happens in the community and building those over time. Those feel like really important pieces of wisdom for congregational leaders in particular. And I'm curious about, as you think about kind of, I mean, we know that recovery is a long road. It doesn't just happen in a moment, but it's a long road. And I'm curious what wisdom you might offer to congregations, church leaders, even community leaders, denominational leaders, maybe that is sort of long term thinking.
So every organization, every community I've lived in has a DNA.
Hmm.
It is really, really challenging to change the DNA.
Hmm.
Um, some people are successful at doing it in little ways, and certainly things, grow and change over time. But when you have a catastrophic event like this, you have a prime opportunity to reshape the DNA of your community and the DNA of your organizations.
Hmm.
What this has done in this community, it has drawn out the best.
Hmm.
Every single person that shows up to a meeting, they're showing up with a heart that is full of compassion, a desire to help, and a skill set that they can bring to the table.
I think you've said some really important things for congregations to remember and leaders in the community, really. And that is thinking about how they understand themselves and their people. That's this identification of giftedness, uniquenesses that they offer. That feels really important. And the other piece that you've just talked about is the relationships, the network, and how you build those relationships. And some of those relationships are with your own people. So you can say, hey, you ought to call so and so just retired from. And so it's knowing your people. But a lot of those relationships are in the community and that networking that happens. So that in these times, you're really drawing on those relationships. That feels like very important wisdom for leaders, congregational and community leaders in this moment. And I want to wrap up our conversation by turning kind of to the long term recovery in Kerrville and what is giving you hope right now.
Well, every organization, community I've lived in has a DNA. And it's kind of, I use that term a lot when I'm talking about, folks that are setting up a new business and they're going to onboard employees. I'm like, be thoughtful. You will have a DNA. You get to pick it if you're intentional about it. But if you don't, it's going to happen anyway.
Right.
Well, there's a DNA to every community. There's a DNA to every church, every organization. And once it's set, it's pretty challenging to really make it shift in big ways.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you have a storm event like this and it has this catastrophic impact on a community, you get about as close to hitting the reset button on your DNA as you can. And what I have seen in this community is the most beautiful groundswell of response of people coming out of every walk of life, every socioeconomic background, every skill set, and they show up to meetings and they bring their unique perspective and their skills, and they bring a heart full of compassion of wanting to help. And so when I'm thinking about this long term, and I'm every time I'm with the foundation has these advisory councils that get kind of stood up to help us think through particular problems. Well, the easy problem, easy in quotation marks, the easy problem to solve is the one in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
The problem to solve is the one that's 3 hills over.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly challenging people to think about, okay, we're trying to figure out what does a mental health solution look like. Okay, where's the immediate problem of people are hurting, people have all these different mental health outcomes as a result of the flood that absolutely need to be addressed. That's the problem that's in front of us. And it's easy to solve in the sense that that's the one that we're talking about. That's the one we can figure out where our resources are and put those resources to work. The harder problem is to suspend your thought process for a second and to look at your solution in terms of that 3 hill over problem of how is this going to impact what's going to happen in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is the most beautiful problem to solve in all of this is how can we take the good that is coming out of the aftermath of this flood and make that part of our DNA going forward? And I don't have an answer yet.
Mm-hmm.
Keep thinking about it. I'm going to keep walking on those stones that God sets down in front of me, keep having conversations, and keep being curious about it. And I think that there will be an opportunity in there somewhere, but it's not going to just come from me. It's going to come from, you know, our mutual good friend, Shannon Hopkins, is just brilliant at this about, you get somebody thinking about something and then you just kind of get out of their way. They bring their own version of the solution to that. And so I'm trying to draft off of my friend Shannon, your friend Shannon, and be that voice that says, what does 3 hills over look like? And how can what we do today shape what happens tomorrow?
And you're already seeing signs of it. You're describing it over and over, how people are showing up with the best of who they are, and that is beginning to really make a difference for who Kerrville is and Kerr County. And so that horizon 3 hills out is looking really good.
And you know what is, I think a key ingredient is that nobody can argue about the wisdom of trying to solve the problems that we're trying to solve. And so when you can pick, when I think about this in a non-disaster recovery context, if you can pick a problem that's a good problem to solve, and you've got really broad consensus on solving that problem, you can really coalesce a team around it and build some good DNA into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. May it be so.
Yes.
May it be so. Thank you so much for being with us today, Greg. You are an amazing human being. I'm really glad that our paths have crossed.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have more conversations.
I look forward to it.